Set. Good evening. I am Aliza Lewin, president of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. The Brandeis Center is an independent, nonpartisan organization dedicated to public interest legal advocacy, research, and education. Our mission is to advance the civil and human rights of the Jewish people and promote justice for all. We're not affiliated with Brandeis University, just named for the same Supreme Court justice. I'm delighted to welcome all of you this evening to our inaugural National Law School Chapter webinar on paths to public interest law. We've moved our national speaker series online so that students who pre-pandemic used to hear from the attorneys on the Brandeis Center's Speakers Bureau in person will still have the opportunity to hear and learn from these illustrious legal minds. This evening's program is our first foray into this virtual universe. We will be announcing additional national webinars soon. At the Brandeis Center, we focus on legal advocacy. Therefore, training and educating the next generation of Jewish civil rights attorneys is of primary importance to us. The Brandeis Center has chapters at law schools across the country, and we developed the JIGSAW Fellowship, our justice initiative guiding student activists worldwide. JIGSAW Fellows are a select group of law school students who are trained by the Brandeis Center to provide guidance and assistance to undergraduate students who experience anti-Semitism on campus. We put together tonight's program to assist law school students and young attorneys who care about the kind of work we do at the Brandeis Center and who may be wondering how to incorporate Jewish civil rights work into their future careers. Tonight, you will hear from 3 attorneys who have taken very different paths, yet each has integrated civil rights work on behalf of the Jewish community into their legal practice. I'm privileged to consider each of tonight's panelists, Michael Helfand, Avishai Dunn, and Denise Katz-Prober, a friend and a colleague. They are outstanding lawyers and wonderful speakers. You are in for a treat. Our panel tonight will be introduced by Rachel Frommer, coordinator of the Brandeis Center's JIGSAW Fellowship. Rachel was part of the inaugural JIGSAW cohort. She's currently a 3L at Cardozo School of Law and president of the Cardozo Brandeis Center chapter. It's my pleasure now to turn the program over to Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you, Aliza, and thank you everyone for coming. We will be hearing from 3 attorneys who have, as Aliza explained, have taken these very different paths all toward a goal of incorporating or focusing on Jewish civil rights within their practice. So to explain how this is going to run, I'll be asking some questions, putting them to the panel, and then we will have each panelist answer in turn. And then at the end, we'll leave some time for questions. You can put them in the chat, you can put them in the Q&A, and we will then ask the panel. So on our panel tonight, we have Avishai Dunn, who is a complex commercial litigation associate at Arnold and Porter K. Schaller in New York. We have Michael Helfand, professor of law and vice dean for faculty and research at Pepperdine Caruso School of Law, as well as being interim director of Pepperdine Law's Newt Institute on Law, Religion, and Ethics. He also serves as visiting professor and Oscar M. Rughausen Distinguished Fellow at Yale Law School, where he teaches a seminar on religious liberty, and Denise Katz-Prober, who is the director of legal initiatives at the Brandeis Center. So our first question tonight, and let's start with you, Denise. Can you give us an overview of your career path since you graduated law school and how you started on this path toward working either directly in civil rights, anti-discrimination law, or somehow incorporating it into your practice? And did you know going into law school that this was something you wanted to have as part of your professional life?
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Aliza, for that really generous introduction. I'm really honored to be part of this panel with Avishai and with Michael tonight. So I graduated law school in 2010. I went to Suffolk University Law School in Boston, Massachusetts, and I joined the Brandeis Center at the end of February of 2019. Before law school, I actually worked on issues that I think intersect with a lot of the issues that I work on, with some of the issues I work on today. I worked for a research organization that focuses on extremist groups, many of whom are motivated by anti-Semitism and Jew hatred. But before I came to the Brandeis Center after law school, I spent most of my career, legal career, as a litigator. Most of that time I spent as a criminal prosecutor. I did a fellowship at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia, where I prosecuted adult crimes, and then I moved, where I spent most of my career as a criminal prosecutor at the Attorney General's Office in D.C., where I prosecuted juvenile offenses. And I had the opportunity to work on, some of the most serious and violent prosecutions in the office, including, felony and aggravated assaults, armed carjackings, homicide. But I ended my career at the Attorney General's Office working on civil defense litigation. I defended the District of Columbia government in federal constitutional civil rights cases, employment discrimination claims, and personal injury cases. So, before I came to the Brandeis Center, I did not work in my legal career necessarily directly on the issues that I work on here today. But I will say that I brought with me a lifelong passion, I think, and commitment to the issues. It's really, I could say that I've been obsessed with, anti-Semitism, questions about Jewish survival and Jewish civil rights my entire life. And, I got to a point, I think, in my legal career where I realized I wanted to focus on these issues in my career, not just sort of outside my career in my personal life, which is what I had done until then. I was immersed in these issues, whether it's, reading, thinking, debating these issues, going to community events about these issues. I wanted to focus on them in my career. I realized I was, almost 10 years out of law school. And I knew that we were in sort of a historic moment in terms of the resurgence of anti-Semitism. And for me, it was just the perfect moment to pivot in my career. And I thought, if not now, when? And so I reached out to, mentors and guides that I had nurtured throughout my career to find in this field, to sort of get their advice about where I should go. And I had my eye on the Brandeis Center, to be honest, for many years. I had met actually Ken Marcus. Right after I graduated law school, I stayed abreast of the work that the Brandeis Center was doing. And for me, it was a perfect fit because, the Brandeis Center's mission of using legal tools to combat anti-Semitism perfectly, aligned with my own background, my passion and my interest, as well as my legal skills. And so that is how I think I came to work on these issues.
And Avishai, you took a very different path. Can you tell us about that?
So first of all, Raquel, thank you for moderating this, and thanks again to the Brandeis Center for organizing the panel. So I graduated law school pretty recently, graduated 2017. I always sort of knew I wanted to do something like Israel related or Jewish related with my career. Before law school, I actually spent 2 years working for the Israeli government. I spent 1 year doing speechwriting for Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, and I spent a year as a research fellow at the Israeli Ministry of Justice. And I remember my colleagues there were doing legal work and just devoting their lives to helping defend the Jewish state and helping the Jewish people. And I thought, wow, how cool would it be to be able to have a career where I got to wake up in the morning and really think to myself, I'm doing something meaningful. And of course, there were many stressful days, at jobs like that, but I remember how proud everybody was to be there and how passionate they were. So, going into law school, I didn't quite know exactly how I was going to incorporate that sort of passion and that sort of motivation into my career, but I knew that it was a focus of mine. So then after law school, I clerked for Judge Livingston on the Second Circuit, and I came to A&P as a litigation associate. I chose A&P because I knew they had a history of doing Israel-related work and work on Jewish issues. And I remember going to A&P, and they said 2 things to us, around our first day. They said, number 1, pro bono is very important. And number 2, you should take charge of your own practice. And I had heard about Elisa's work, the Zivotofsky case, the Jerusalem passport case, and the Brandeis Center in general. So I reached out to a former boss of mine who put me in touch with Elisa, and I met her in person about 1.5 years ago, I guess in the offices of Lewin & Lewin in DC. And I brought the Brandeis Center into the firm as a pro bono client, and I've developed a relationship with the Brandeis Center since then. And now here we are.
I hope maybe we'll have some time to talk about that relationships and the work that you guys have actually done. I think that could be really interesting.
Sure.
And Michael, how have you gotten to where you are, and how does Jewish anti-discrimination work look like in your professional life?
I was thinking about this in advance of this panel, and I repeatedly felt like the word that came to mind to describe it all is luck. I, like reflecting a little bit, just feel lucky repeatedly, like things just seem to have fallen into my lap. Been trying to organize like some sort of grand theory of how it all worked out, but a lot of luck. I went to Yeshiva College, Yeshiva University's undergraduate school, and from there moved on to graduate school. I was originally pursuing a PhD in political science, and thought I was going to do that for a while until I got an extraordinary piece of advice from my wife, who told me, please stop it and go to law school like me. And that's one of the best pieces of advice I ever got. I think we may talk about good advice later, but I switched over to Yale Law School, where I was while also working on my PhD for a little bit. I think maybe that's part of kind of where things started for me, kind of doing a PhD alongside law school in a way that, kept me both very focused on legal practice and very focused on academics side by side. And maybe that's a common theme through all of this. From there, I went to, I clerked on the Sixth Circuit in Memphis, Tennessee. My wife is from Memphis, Tennessee. Those were my instructions once again. Maybe that's another theme. And so we were there for a year while I was still actually working on my dissertation. So even as I was clerking for a federal judge, I was also working on my dissertation. And then I went from there to work at Davis Polk and Bardwell. Really just a wonderful firm in New York. I had the extraordinary luck of working for a partner who shared a lot of my educational background. We both went to the same high school. We both went to the same seminary in Israel. We both spent time at Yeshiva College, both clerked for the Sixth Circuit. And, that relationship at Davis Polk we took on a lot of pro bono projects related to rabbinical courts, which I'd say once again started allowing me to think about what community-related practice looks like, combined with, I was still working on my dissertation. Dissertations, it turns out, take a long time, especially if you're doing a second thing at the same time. And from there, I worked at Davis Polk for a couple of years, had the pleasure of doing pro bono work for the Beth Din of America, where I'd actually interned while I was in law school. And from Davis Polk, I moved on to Pepperdine University, or now Pepperdine Caruso School of Law, where I've been for 10 years. And I'd say, maybe some of those are the same themes kind of crept up. I still try to listen to my wife, and I still do a lot of community-related legal work. I still do work for the Beth Din of America. Now I'm on their board, kind of transitioning of relationships from being their attorney to being a board member. I still do quite a lot of work in the religious liberty arena, which was a theme of both my dissertation and a lot of the work I did in law school. And I still am an academic. So from dissertation to paper writing, the same idea. I'm trying to keep all three pillars, I guess, of something that looks like a life of the mind going forward.
So you've touched on it a bit already, talking about luck and how you sort of fell into these different things and they've come together. But as law students, I'll speak for myself, it's nice to know, specific steps. How did someone get to where they are? So how can I emulate it if it's something that sounds interesting? So is there any particular standout moment, internship encounter that you had that you feel was really important for your development? Were there a series of strategies that you put into place that helped you get here? And maybe Michael, you can expand on that a little bit to start.
Yes, I'm first. I'm an and kind of guy. What I mean by that is when people give me a choice of things I can be working on, do you want to do A or B? I always say yes. So I never give things up. And that has been a common theme for everything that I've done. When, the answer was, well, do you want to go to grad school or law school? I said yes. And when the question was, do you want to work on your dissertation now, or do you want to clerk for a judge? I said yes. And when I was in full-time practice and still had a dissertation to get done and needed to prepare for the job market, my answer was yes. So I'd say one common theme is, if this is a practice you really want to build, and this is an area of focus and something you're passionate about, I think part of the answer is to grab on to all opportunities, to not make put yourself in this position as if you have these false choices. You know, when you push yourself for something you're passionate about, I think you can grab onto different kinds of opportunities. I'd also say, like, a big thing for me along the way, I mean, listening to smart people, like listening to people who give good advice. I still think about how I got into, like, I do a lot of work on like religious arbitration and rabbinical courts. And it came from like a conversation with a professor who told me how he was bored to tears about a paper. Well, he didn't say it. He looked at, you know, when your professor looks at you and you can tell they're bored. I'm sure every student on this call knows what that looks like. Maybe they're super exciting all the time. And so I'm talking about this professor of mine, Prince of a Human Being, Daniel Markovitz, and I can tell he's bored. And then I tell him I'm working for a rabbinical course, and he says to me, Michael, just write me a paper about what you're doing on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And, like, you know, a little bit of a light went off in my head, like listening to and feedback in terms of what really like was unique and cutting edge and kind of not being stuck and like, this is what I want to do. I think that's been very important. There are people along the way who have really, like, if you're willing to get feedback and listen to advice and seize opportunities as they come, I think that's incredibly important. And not making believe you have to do one or the other, but trying to make sure you're simultaneously building a portfolio and what you're passionate about while you're building a career path alongside of it.
It's very interesting. And I mean, you have clearly done a lot at the same time. What about you, Denise? What were the steps that you took?
You know, the last point that Michael just made about sort of, you know, these parallel portfolios in your life really resonates with me because, you know, there was for most of my legal career after law school, I didn't necessarily focus on, you know, Jewish civil rights or the issues that I'm working on now, but I really nurtured the connections and the relationships that I made outside of my work. And that proved to be, in this area, you know, with people who are in this field, both lawyers and non-lawyers, by the way. And as it turned out, that ended up being really important, even just for, you know, being in this position today at the Brandeis Center. When I had this moment that I talked about earlier, where I realized I needed to pivot in my career to work on these issues that are a lifelong passion for me, I reached out to a mentor who I had known since college. 15 years ago, I met him, and he's a scholar who works in this area. And I met him through my activism in college working on these issues. And I maintained that relationship over the years, even though I wasn't working on these issues directly, keeping him abreast of my career, letting him know that, you know, I'm still passionate about these issues and I care about them. And he knew how invested I was and that what my plans were to come back to these issues. And in terms of my career, working on them in my career. And so when I had this moment where I realized I want to pivot, I reached out to him for guidance and advice. And he understood exactly, you know, who I was, what I wanted. And he gave me really, really good advice. He actually told me that at that very moment, the president of the Brandeis Center had reached out to him asking for recommendations, candidates, who he could recommend for a director of legal initiatives. And he gave my name. So, and that's sort of how I ended up here. And I think that nurturing those relationships, like I said, for me personally, has been key. And I think it can't be underestimated.
What about you, Avishai? Any key moments?
So I'll echo what both Michael and Denise said. So in terms of what Michael said about seizing every opportunity. So I spoke a little bit about before that I just decided that I wanted to meet Eliza and learn more about what she was up to, what the Brandeis Center was up to. And I just reached out to a former boss of mine who I knew her and said, can you put us in touch? And in terms of, even when you're at a big law firm, I was very blessed to have the opportunity and the sort of empowerment to say that you're in charge of your own legal career and that if there's certain cases you want to work on, you can't just expect the sort of work to just land in your lap. A lot comes from networking opportunities and just shooting people an email. If you feel like there's an organization that you want to work with. You know, many people in this field are very nice, know exactly what it's like to have just graduated law school and not really know exactly how to get your feet wet. And I found that just trying to make connections has been very helpful. And then in terms of what Denise said about finding mentors and the people who inspire you, in terms of like a specific encounter, I'd say, Aliza, I don't know if I ever told you this story, but I remember when Nat Lewin, Aliza's father, came to speak. He came to speak to the Jewish community at my school. And for those who don't know, Nat Lewin's had an extraordinarily distinguished career litigating Jewish civil rights issues, religious liberty issues. And among the many interesting things that he talked about, he mentioned that he spoke about how when he first started working as a practicing lawyer in the early 60s, before the Civil Rights Act, it was nearly impossible to work at a big firm and also be Shomer Shabbos. And I will not forget this. He said the response of different people when he said, I'm Shomer Shabbos, I can't work on Saturdays, they said, well, get a dispensation from your rabbi. That was the response. And it struck me because in terms of how much progress we've made since then, it's not even something I think about anymore. I have many partners I work with who are Shomer Shabbos. There's a Mincha Marav Minyan in the offices of Arnold and Porter in New York. And it's something that I no longer take for granted. And it also inspired me to think to myself, not only how far we've come, but also how far we have to go to what it means for Jews to be a minority in this country and how necessary it is for us to stand up for our rights. And so I think also finding mentors who inspire you in that way is also a very important thing.
Can you talk a little bit about specifics of how you've done this work in what you're doing now or in the past, or, Denise, for you, before you were part of the Brandeis Center, was there any way that you were still involved in this space in a practical way, or now the kind of work that you're doing? So what does a particular project look like in this arena? And we could start with you, Denise.
Well, as mentioned, I work at the Brandeis Center, and it's the bread and butter of what I do every day. I work on Jewish civil rights issues, and what that actually looks like. I'm investigating and drafting Title VI complaints with the Office of Civil Rights. I'm utilizing the laws that protect students from discrimination on campus. I am, advising and working with students who are facing anti-Semitism in real time, helping them think strategically about how to use these laws, these anti-discrimination laws, to improve their situation on campus or engage with administrators. I'm helping along with the Brandeis Center to train and educate university administrators about what anti-Semitism looks like, how it manifests on their campuses today, and what their legal obligations are to respond to anti-Semitic harassment and discrimination. I will say, for instance, when I started at the Brandeis Center, my first 2 weeks here, I went with Aliza. I was on Capitol Hill with Aliza, meeting with representative of Congress on the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism and issues related to the contemporary manifestations of anti-Semitism. So, the work that I do here is very varied, but it's all directly on point. And I will say as well, I've had opportunities to really harness my litigation background, being involved, for instance, with court litigation that the Brandeis Center has spearheaded. We filed a lawsuit in 2016 against the current and former members of the American Studies Association related to the adoption of resolution to boycott Israeli academic institutions. So there has definitely been varied work, but all the work is directly related, again, to civil rights, Jewish civil rights.
And Avishai, I know you've done some work with the Brandeis Center, so can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, doing in present tense. Yeah, so we have, I can talk generally about, there's one major case that I'm actually working with the Brandeis Center on. So I, along with Baruch Weiss, it's a partner of Arnold and Porter. So we represent a class of Jewish and pro-Israel students at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And it's a very unfortunate situation because for years, the students there have been facing this relentless campaign of anti-Semitism by their fellow students. And in some cases, as we documented, like some faculty members have even been complicit in this. It comes from both the extreme left and the extreme right. From the right, unfortunately, Jewish students are peppered with swastikas, defacement of Jewish property. And then from the left, Jewish students are called Nazis and white supremacists because they're Zionists. Literally this week, unfortunately, the Students for Justice in Palestine at University of Illinois put out a statement that basically said, like, Zionism is white supremacy. And if you believe Israel has a right to exist and you're Jewish, we will lobby progressive student groups on campus to make sure that you are shunned and that you will be excluded. It's a very unfortunate situation. And so back in March, working with the Brandeis Center, we filed a Title VI complaint on behalf of the Jewish and pro-Israel students at UIUC, saying that the university knew about this and in some circumstances actually, unfortunately, helped foster it and did not effectively dispel that hostile environment on campus. And this past weekend, there are actually two big developments in the case. One is that the university issued a joint statement along with A&P and the Brandeis Center, pledging to fight the anti-Semitic hostile environment on its campus. And the other thing that happened recently is that the Department of Education formally opened its investigation in our complaint. So things are very fast moving in this case. It's an extraordinarily rewarding case. I mean, the facts are very unfortunate, but I mean, thank God, it's the sort of thing that you know, when I was talking before about doing work that you find passionate, that you're passionate about, thank God this qualifies.
And what about you, Michael? Have you done work in the past in your litigation career, now through your academic lens? What kind of work do you do?
So I always say, I never know what the new day is going to bring. I have, you know, I try and, you know, it sounds very consistent with what both Denise and Avishai said, you know, trying to seize opportunities that fall within kind of my wheelhouse. So like, I'm an academic, I care quite a lot about the intersection of law and religion, how that plays out in institutions, how that plays out with respect to the First Amendment. And, you know, as a result, you know, whether it's advising a rabbinical court, that's something that happens pretty regularly for me. I have a great passion for arbitration law, and I've married that to my law and religion interests. That's something that comes up quite a lot. Also serving as an arbitrator for rabbinical courts, that's something that I get to do periodically as part of kind of my interests in that area. Sometimes it's there's amicus brief writing. That's something that I do here and there, and evidently I'm about to do again. Opportunities to write, for those who don't know, third-party briefs, some friends of the court brief, where you tell the court, listen, we have an interest in this case, and here's why, and here's what we think you should do. If it's not brief writing or providing some sort of advice or sitting on boards or things like that, I've recently actually I guess this is recorded, not too late. I'm also on my school's board, and you know, we've had some issues here in California that we've started to pursue some litigation as well. I find like in every area, whether it's my academic life where I get to write a lot about it, my communal life where I like to do a lot of speaking and community engagement about it, whether it's providing advice or writing briefs or spearheading litigation. I think, you know, there are a lot of institutions out there that are always looking for passionate people to do work. You know, you never know, as I said, what the new day will bring, but all of those are the kinds of projects that I find myself frequently working on.
Jumping ahead to say in 10, 15 years from now, where do you see yourself, and specifically in relation to this kind of work, if you would like to just continue doing what you're doing now and growing in it, seizing on those opportunities? Do you have, you know, a dream of where you end up? Avishai, what are you thinking?
I mean, you know, it's funny. I sort of just started my legal career, but I do really like what I do. There's a saying I once heard about the practice of law and litigation specifically. It's kind of like a football game. So you can be a player in the game, which is like being a litigator. You can be a referee, which is like being a judge, or you can be a commentator, which is like being an academic. And there was a time when I kind of thought, when I was clerking especially, oh, maybe I'll enjoy being a judge. Maybe I'd enjoy being an academic and a commentator. But kind of like playing the game. I like the thrill of litigation. I enjoy directly representing people, interviewing people, helping improve their lives. And not that you can't also do that while also being an academic, obviously, but I feel like, you can obviously practice law then too, but I feel like kind of devoting my life to just that right now, I think I would enjoy that a lot. And so I see myself continuing to be a litigator and hoping for a career that continually allows me to do work that's as fulfilling as the work I do now.
And what about you, Denise? You were just talking about this big pivot that you made into the Brandeis Center. What's the kind of the 10-year plan, if there is one?
I definitely don't want to pivot out of this space. I feel so, not only do I love it, but I feel so fortunate to finally be doing it. So I'm not going to pivot again. However, you should always have a goal. And then when you reach that goal, make another goal. So, I happened to join the Brandeis Center. I think it turned out I realized at a time when it's really expanding its impact and its reputation and its resources, and it's in such high demand, and the types of cases that it's working on is just so varied. I think one of the unique aspects of joining a nonprofit, working at a nonprofit on these issues, is that I think you do have an opportunity with the organization to really forge a meaningful role and grow with the organization. Maybe as opposed to a big law firm where there's also like an impenetrable sort of hierarchy that you can't really access. I've had the opportunity to work directly, with the upper echelon of the organization, with Ken and Eliza, and really learn from, their incredible expertise. And I feel as though I'm also relied on in a meaningful way here. So I would love also to be able to take advantage more of, litigation opportunities where I'm able to harness my background as a litigator. I'm realizing from this vantage point that, the battles are against anti-Semitism. Increasingly, they are being fought in the courtroom. And I would like to be part of that even more so in the future. So that's how I see myself growing with the Brandeis Center, I think, in the years to come.
And Michael, I saw you sort of shaking your head. What's your thought on this?
I don't know. You have any good ideas for me? I'm open to suggestion. I really don't know the answer to the question. And by the way, just outside of this, I think about it all the time. I certainly agree with Denise. You should be setting goals. I really don't have a sense. I'm very happy right now with all the different things I get to do, the people I get to work with. Never know what the next project's going to look like. I do try to distill for myself as I try to think about where I want to go. Like, what are my most satisfying moments? Like, when am I do I feel like the most meaning? Like, what are those? And try to figure out what they all have in common. And no doubt for me, it is when I get to bring my academic experience together with my community involvement, some way in which I can bring information, education, maybe even litigation, either for or on behalf of my faith community, the people who kind of I share my Shabbat with. Those moments I think are the best for me. And so, whatever the coming years bring, I suspect that will always be a very, very big part of it, and just trying to figure out different ways in which that works. I'd say the other big piece of, what the coming years may look like, I started, this coming spring will be the second time I do it. I started this past spring teaching in Yale Law School's free exercise clinic. This is something that just this is one of those and moments. When they needed someone now, and I was the right guy for the moment. And I ended up, before the pandemic, I was teaching Monday, Wednesday, Thursday at Pepperdine, and Tuesdays in New Haven. And that was a strange choice, but it was certainly the right choice. The opportunity to work with people who are passionate about some of the things I'm passionate about, and teach and learn from and work together in that way. That's been a really big deal. Avishai mentioned it before, but I think I don't know what, like 95% of the people in this area look up to the Lewins. Like, how many people say, like, how did you end up in this field? It's like, well, I was inspired by the Lewins. It's just like, we should talk to the 5% if we can find them who aren't, or something like that. In any event, and you know, the opportunity to think about the way in which people like that impacted me, and the opportunity to like see who's coming up and how you build infrastructure to make that possible for more and more people. That's something that's been very meaningful to me. I'm very into building infrastructure and finding ways to just get more and more talent and passion into the pipeline. I suspect that'll be a big piece of what I do. I don't know if that'll look like, but I certainly think that that'll be a big piece of what the next 10 to 15, you know, things look like over the next 10 to 15 years.
I add my voice to the 95%. But
I may be wrong about 95. It may be 100. I was really, it's, you know, like at the Olympics when you give like 9 out of 10 to the skater because you're nervous there's someone out there that you're not sure about that's going to get a 10. There may be 0%. It just may be 100%, and it just may be, yeah, that might be right.
Yeah, they have full responsibility for all of us. So what advice would you give to a law student or, you know, a new attorney who is looking to do this kind of work in some capacity? Is there a particular organization or contact that you made that you thought was really useful? Is it just about sort of sitting down with yourself and plotting out, this is something that's important to me and I need to take some steps to make sure this is part of my professional life? What kind of advice could you give? What about you, Michael?
You know, one thing I'll say is writing. I do a lot of general audience writing. I like to try to explain what's going on in the courts to just people. I actually think that is something that if it's something you like doing, you're good at doing, I think it's actually really good in terms of building a platform. For kind of putting yourself out there as someone who is passionate and interested in an area and can write about it. I think, especially in the information age where, you know, you think about social media and the way in which knowledge travels, I think becoming somebody who as part of their portfolio is doing, you know, general audience writing along the side, I think that's something that is a very useful strategy. I think a lot about what Denise said. I mean, if this is something you're passionate about, network the hell out of it. You know, find people who share your passion and talk to them and learn from them. And you know, it shouldn't be like thinking about people in terms of what they can get you. It should be thinking about people and what you can learn from them, and just constantly meeting people who have experience in the space and just setting up opportunities to meet. I mean, during the pandemic, just setting up Zoom meetings with people if they're willing to, and talking about their experience and what they've learned and how they did it, and asking those people, you know, given my passion, who are the other 2 people you think I should be talking to about this kind of stuff, and building a network there. I think writing and networking, I mean, there's certainly a lot more, but those are 2 big things that I would say in terms of building a platform for this kind of work, I think are very important.
And Avishai, you were mentioning how you're sort of starting out a little bit. Is there something that you have done that you've seen has been really effective, or something that you think you might still try to put into action?
Yeah, I'll echo Michael's point about networking. I found that a lot of, I mean, it's unfortunate because of COVID now, it's a little more difficult, but there are a lot of conferences out there that you can go to where you can meet people who are also in this field. Like in retrospect, this wasn't the smartest idea given COVID, but I was at APAC in March. And that was, you know, I got to see people who network with a lot of different pro-Israel lawyers. I was at a conference in Israel, in Jerusalem back in, I think, June of last year. Elisa spoke there. It was organized by this group called the Legal Network Initiative. And specifically, its specific goal is to bring together pro-Israel lawyers from around the world to come together to share best practices and how to fight BDS. And, you know, it's, I would definitely say that making connections in that way has proven to be invaluable for me. In general, I'd also sort of in terms of mindset, especially if you're planning on working at a big firm after law school, and you know that you want to do this work, it can be very easy at a firm to kind of forget the reason that you entered law in the first place. Like oftentimes you'll be put on, maybe they are very interesting cases, but you know, people, maybe not exactly what you want to do, and people need to be deposed, there's motion practice, and a lot of things happen very quickly. And it's important for you to every so often take a step back and say, what do I want to do? How can I properly orient my career so that I'm actually doing the work that I'm passionate about? And to the extent that you can keep your perspective on that as you enter the firm, I think you'll always sort of end up looking out for those opportunities that are there that'll allow you, that'll eventually lead to those legal opportunities that you find meaningful.
And Denise, you alluded to the importance of networking already and about building that network and maintaining the network, but any other pieces of advice that you could pass on?
I think that we need to realize you may, but probably will not get your dream job right out of law school. And, you know, if you're really committed to working in this area, you know, be steadfast and nurture that passion. This panel is showing you, I think, how many different ways there are to either incorporate this work into your practice or work directly on these issues. You know, I think that it's important to just excel at any job you have and do your best, even if it's not directly on point to what you necessarily want to end up doing. You never know also about the skill set that's going to be transferable. You know, my litigation skills are helpful here. You know, my experience interviewing witnesses, investigating evidence, you know, dealing with vulnerable victims of trauma as a prosecutor, all of that has helped me even in just speaking with students, you know, who have experienced anti-Semitism and discrimination on campus. So, you know, I think that's important to remember. Maybe, you know, another piece of advice I would have related to that is that, you know, it's really important, as I said, to nurture and really to nurture your passion for the issues and become a subject matter expert, I think, because when you get the opportunity, you know, read about the issues, you know, study the issues. And when you get an opportunity to speak to someone in the field, you know, that passion and that knowledge base, I think will stand out. I know you know, one of the best parts about working in the nonprofit world as I do on these issues is that the people that I work about are so passionate and so knowledgeable about the issues, and it comes from a lifelong commitment and devotion to the issues, and they can spot other people who, you know, have that knowledge and passion, knowledge that doesn't come from like Googling, you know, the last 2 weeks of news, but, you know, having a sort of really broad understanding of the landscape and the history of the issues. So I think that that'll enable you to stand out and have a leg up when you're presented with an opportunity to work in this field on these issues, as well as succeed when you're working here.
That's a really good point about reading and knowing what's going on. And it's kind of the only way to even know what this topic is that we've been talking about. What is Jewish civil rights work? What are the issues that are being dealt with right now? And we've talked a little bit about it through the work that Denise and Avishai, you were talking about what you've done with the Brandeis Center. But can you get into a little bit more detail of what some of the issues have actually looked like, or some of the common themes or elements of this kind of work that come up? Avishai.
Just things that keep coming up in the work, the sort of issues that you deal with, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and specifically with this work, what are some of the common things that you see as the points that you need to know about? Are there particular issues people should be reading up about, be knowledgeable about, maybe something that's a little off the radar that they wouldn't have come across?
Well, I guess generally speaking, I suppose Title VI is something that I've worked a lot on. I know Denise has worked on it also, and there have been legal developments, I would say, in that field, at least in the past past year, because like in December 2019, the Trump administration issued an executive order. Let me back up. Title VI prohibits discrimination in schools that receive federal funding and prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin. And it also, as interpreted, a school, if they know about a hostile environment against a particular protected class, a school has to take reasonable and effective measures to eliminate the hostile environment. So race, color, national origin. Since 2004, and it was repeated under the Obama administration, Jews have been included in that as a protected class. And recently, in December 2019, the Trump administration issued an executive order that said that it told the Office for Civil Rights and other federal agencies, when you're determining whether an action is anti-Semitic, you should consider the IRA definition, the International Holocaust, right, Denise was talking about it before, the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. And one of the examples of anti-Semitism listed there is denying Israel's right to exist, denying the Jewish people the right to self-determination. And so that's become, I think, an interesting cutting edge issue that I've definitely been dealing with. It's right at the forefront of the University of Illinois case that I'm working on. And I suppose if you want to read up on something that's very pressing and very novel and interesting, that's a good place to start.
Yes, that's definitely something you need to know about from the work that I've done with the Brandeis Center. I think that's definitely a major issue. One question we got, and this is for whoever would like to answer it, is there a particular hurdle or major success or highlight of your career that really stands out to you? And I know as law students, we definitely deal with both of those, maybe more with one than the other sometimes. But is there one of those moments that you either overcame or saw that it was really meaningful for you, how it got you to the next point that you'd like to share? Whoever would like to take that question or not.
I could say something, yeah, about a hurdle, unless. This is I would say something that looked to me like a failure, and at the time it was a failure, but in retrospect, it was actually like one of the best things that could have happened to me and actually launched my professional career. So my senior year of college, I knew that I was going to spend the summer studying for the LSATs and then applying to law school, but I still had about a year or so to fill between like college and when I'd eventually go to law school. So the TICFA Fund, I don't know if you guys know it, but the TICFA Fund was offering a year-long fellowship where basically they just pay you to just debate ideas and think about Jewish issues and you just sit around and talk and I was like, that's it, that's what I want to do. The TICFA Fund knows me, I don't need to do anything else. I've done TICFA programs before, they know me, I got this. So that was the only thing I applied to. And then TICFA rejected me. I did not get the fellowship. And I was very dejected. Like I graduated college not knowing what I was going to do. Like I sort of knew, like I wanted to do something Jewish and, you know, work that I found meaningful. I had no idea how I was going to get my foot in the door. And then a few months later, I was on this like Jewish mailing list and I got an email asking for applicants to apply to the Israeli delegation to the United Nations. So I applied for that. That got me the connection to the Israeli Ministry of Justice. And my former boss there connected me to Eliza, which is why I'm here today. So basically, the bottom line is sometimes in life, you'll have experiences that will seem like failures, but in retrospect, were actually blessings. So just always try to keep an open mind about those things.
Again, all roads lead to the Lewins. So we received a couple of questions about amicus brief writing. That's something that, Michael, you mentioned that you might be working on something. And also there's some work that, Avishai, you've done with BDS laws and their constitutionality. So maybe, Michael, you can take up that question first.
Anything particular about amicus brief writing or?
Both the kind of the how or of when you decide to do it, and if you're working on anything particular right now.
How I Particide is a really interesting question. As an academic, I feel like I have a lot of leeway in terms of the projects I decide to take and don't take. And I have a very hard and fast rule that I only take on projects that I am super invested in and I completely agree with, meaning I will not take on projects like as a hired gun, which sometimes happens. I need to believe every word that I'm writing because, you know, I don't have to take cases. What did Avishai call me? I'm the commentator. So I'm not playing the game. So that's been a really important and helpful rule for me. As a result, invariably the projects I do choose to work on, I'm pretty passionate about. And I form relationships over the years with different kinds of organizations. The Union of Orthodox Jewish Congregations, the OU, is one of the organizations that I work most frequently with on these kinds of matters. You know, we've built a relationship over time in ways that kind of track the conversation we've been having here. And so, you know, we'll sit down, we'll talk about, you know, what we want to write. And, you know, one of the things for me is the opportunity to help institutions that I'm very invested in figure out how they want to think through a particular issue. You know, what do I want my community's take to be, almost, if that makes any sense. That's kind of how I think about amicus brief writing. I want to partner with an organization I care about on a case that I care about in a way where we can kind of fashion communal voice in a way that I think is deeply meaningful. Right now, it sounds like I may be, there's some of this, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about COVID litigation with respect to religious liberty. For me, it's a complicated conversation. Sometimes I think restrictions make a lot of sense. Sometimes I think they're not done in the way that I think they ought to be done. And trying to find just the right spot where I feel like this is where I want to speak and how I want to speak, and finding the right organization to work with. And, you know, it's possible with some of the recent activity before request by various plaintiffs to the court for emergency relief, I may end up writing something on behalf of one of the parties. We'll see how it shakes out, I'd say, over the next 48 hours. But that's certainly an area that I'm thinking quite a lot about right now.
Can you give a little hint of maybe an area that bothers you, or the one that maybe looks like it is kind of the way that this should be done? You know, how you're leaning on this issue?
I mean, to me, you know, I actually wrote something recently about, you know, what was going on in New York and what bugs me about Governor Cuomo's original executive order with respect to red zones and orange zones and yellow zones. And to me, you know, what really bugged me was, if you read the executive order, there was no explanation as to how you became a red zone. And the executive order told you what happened if you were a red zone. Here's what got shut down. Here's capacity limits in particular kinds of places. But there was no clear rules as to how you became a red zone. And I thought that really opened the door to kind of either actual government manipulation, or even if everything was, so to speak, kosher. The rules weren't crafted in a way that would, I thought, secure public trust. Public wants and deserves transparency, rules that you're confident can be applied across the board. So those are the things that I think quite a lot about during this pandemic, ways in which government can regulate responsibly in a way that clearly is communicated in a transparent fashion, applied across the board, so there's no worry that, you know, certain groups are bearing the brunt of the restrictions in ways that don't quite track the public health needs of the, you know, whatever the relevant jurisdiction is. And that's what's on my mind. And so, like, I don't want to get involved in a case where I feel like the government's being responsible, but certainly when the government isn't, you know, living up to its responsibilities, where I think the government can do better. I'm always looking to find that spot and an opportunity kind of to, I think, emphasize that point, what, you know, responsible regulation in the face of a public health crisis looks like. I hope that answered your question. It was also a half dodge. It was a half dodge because I don't want to be too specific.
Yes, it was. It was also interesting. So thank you. Avishai, you also have done amicus brief writing on, you know, religious liberty related issues, but more specifically the anti-BDS laws, right? So can you speak a little bit about that process?
Yeah, a little bit. So one of my clients, in addition to the Brandeis Center, is Stand With Us. And we wrote, I helped write 2 amicus briefs in 2 different cases that involved state laws that were passed that were designed to basically say to limit BDS and to say that if you're an organization, I'm trying to remember the exact facts of the case, so it's been a while and I apologize, but I think the law was something along the lines of if you want state funding, you have to basically say that you don't boycott Israel and that you don't, when you're engaging in deciding which companies that you want to hire, you're not going to deliberately choose companies that are, you're going to not avoid choosing companies that are Israeli. And there were a few organizations that challenged these laws on the basis of the First Amendment. So I helped stand with this craft legal brief. I mean, there are many sort of First Amendment issues there. One of them deals with the question of, well, if you're making a determination, if you're deciding about what business, what sort of business to do with a company, is that really speech? Like in terms of a boycott, if you want to advocate for a boycott, let's say you want to write an op-ed, that's one thing. But if you're deciding, well, I'm not going to do business with this company, is that conduct or speech? So that's one particular issue. And in general, I think part of the point of the amicus brief was to bring the attention to the anti-Semitic nature of the BDS movement. Its disproportionate focus on Israel. We brought up how in many cases you can determine racial animus by looking at the disproportionate effects of a particular law or legislation on a minority group. And lo and behold, what does it say that the BDS movement focuses solely on the Jewish state? So those are the sorts of issues I was dealing with in those briefs.
And I know there's a lot more to talk about there, but thank you for the overview. For the last question to wrap it all up, Denise, I'll ask you, have you seen more interest in young lawyers in entering into this field? And if you are, what do you attribute that to?
During my time here, I would say the answer is definitely yes. And I think, for instance, working with law students in our JIGSAW program, what I see is that young people, law students, they are being personally affected by anti-Semitism on their campus. And so they're personally invested in the issues. And so they want to do something about it. And they understand that they can. And I think that that's probably the resurgence and the really, historic rise in anti-Semitism and the particularly, vitriolic forms that we're seeing that the ways that it's manifesting itself on campus. I think the way that it's affecting undergraduate students and then, those students going into law school and wanting to do something that makes a difference. They are, harnessing their personal experiences and saying, I want to do something about this. And that's probably why I am seeing an interest in, for instance, our JIGSAW program. All the law students that I talk to and work with in this program, they're committed to having a career that's either devoted to these issues or they want to figure out how they can continue to work on these issues. And a lot of those JIGSAW fellows that I talk to have actually had personal experiences with anti-Semitism on their campus, even as undergrads. So I think that that's a big part of it from my perspective and what I'm seeing.
And I think as a law student, obviously at one school, but through the JIGSAW program and through other avenues of speaking with people, I do see a lot of interest and concern. And I think a refinement of what that concern is and what we can actually do about it. And I think that has a lot to do with looking at places like the Brandeis Center and seeing that there are actual tools and ways of doing this work. So I really appreciate you all coming and speaking with us. And thank you to our participants and attendees. And please, reach out and look out for more news. I will drop my email into the chat if you would like to reach out with any questions. And thank you all for coming.